Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of The New Standard. And as always, you're listening to the program, and it's being hosted by yours truly, Lance Williams. And you're checking out the program. Please give us with a like and subscribe. And I just want to thank you guys for all your support. We got some changes, and also we're going to be bringing out the show via podcast as well. We got some changes and some updates in terms of what things are happening in terms of the show this year. And I'm going to be primarily doing the show solo this year due to scheduling conflicts. Neil will probably be on the show as a special guest. We'll have Neil come in at certain times during the year and give his feelings and everything he wants to talk about in terms of the Steelers. But also, man, I just want to thank you guys for supporting the show and continuing to, hop on board this experience. And this is going to be an exciting year. And it's going to be an exciting year. We got a lot of changes with the Steelers, and I'm excited to talk about it and bring it to you. So, in terms of the schedule, what we're probably going to do this year is the live show will be the show that we do the post game. The post game will be live, but the Wednesday show will be pre recorded. We're going to pre record the Wednesday show. I think that gives me a little bit of flexibility in terms of my schedule to do it. And the live show will be after the game. And so until the season starts, we'll be doing one show a week, and we'll be bringing that show out on Wednesday. Again, that show will not be a live show. It'll be a pre-recorded show, but I still hope that you guys listen to the show. And if you listen to the show, the pre-recorded show, please put your comments in there, because I would like to take those comments from the pre-recorded show and use those for the Sunday show. So the title of this particular program is Iron Sharpens Iron. And the reason I picked that title is because I think that's what training camp is. Iron sharpens iron. The coaches are getting prepared and ready to work with each other for next season. The players are getting ready physically, mentally. You're getting scheme being installed. It's just the iron sharpens iron. It's hot. Uh, 2-a-days. It's physical. It's just a tough time. It's iron sharpens iron. And in football, it's a game where you've got to be tough physically and mentally. And iron has to sharpen iron. I mean, that's scriptural, so it makes sense. And it's good for everything. Iron sharpens iron. You got to get tough. And this is where you prepare your football team both mentally and physically. And going into this training camp, there are some questions that jump out. And particularly, when I look at this training camp, some things jump out to mind from a positional standpoint. That's offensive tackle, slot cornerback, and number 2 cornerback. And let's go to the offensive line. And me and Neil were talking about the offensive line yesterday. And this is the offensive line that Neil gave me from left to right. Left tackle, Broderick Jones. Guard, Siamalu. Frazier, the rookie Zach Frazier, Daniels, and Fatanu at right tackle. What I'll say about that is, I think that is, if that's how it ends up being in camp, and this is why iron sharpens iron, and why you have to have a really good camp and a really good physical camp to get people ready. Because if you're putting 3 young players with under 3 years experience to start your offensive line, it's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. And in this program, we're going to talk about as well, is this the year that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers finally do not have a winning season under him? And when you look at this offensive line, I mean, that is not a lot of experience. When you look at the best 5 guys on the roster, I think that's the best 5 guys. And I think that is the clear plan. When we saw this in the draft, is that they're retooling and remaking their offensive line, making it highly athletic and very physical. However, the question would be, do you think you're going to get the benefits of that in year one. How fast can that new offensive line gel? I mean, you're talking about a very young group. Uh, and you're talking about it's just new, and you're talking about a young group and a new offensive coordinator. I mean that is a volatile mix, but I think that is what it's going to be, and that is how it's going to shake out in terms of training camp. Now, if you were to ask me if those three guys in Jones, Frazier, and Fatnu develop into Big Troy, develop into outstanding players, and we're talking about 3 years from now, I think we're having a very different discussion. I think Steeler Nation, we're going to have to be patient with this new group. And again, that's why iron sharpens iron. This needs to be a tough physical training camp to get those guys ready to be able to perform at their peak moving forward, especially at that center position. That's going to be very tough. He's going to be making the calls, some of the protection calls, and doing some of the other stuff. And it's going to be tough. I mean, this is going to be tough. This is that first go round, and you're going to have two rookies, I think, starting on your offensive line. And that's a lot. I mean, these guys have to become pros. They have to acclimate themselves to the National Football League and figure out that whole process So I think that's your big question. Also, when you look at this defense, I think the defense clearly, when you look at the defense, is going to be the strength of this football team. I think right now, going into training camp, you have some questions about the number 2 wide receiver. I think that question is unanswered. You've got a new coordinator. And so how he works with Mike Tomlin, again, you're listening to the new standard title of program, Iron Sharpens Iron. Please like and subscribe to the program. The working relationship between Tomlin and Arthur Smith has to get worked out. So right now, I think especially early in the season, I think the Steelers are going to have to lean on their defense where they have the most continuity. Unfortunately, when you look at their roster, I think some of the biggest questions are at cornerback. I mean, if Cam Sutton were starting week one, I would have less trepidation. But when I'm looking at the Steeler roster, I have no idea. And that's again why iron sharpens iron. This is a very important camp on both sides of the ball. The number 2 corner and the slot corner, they have to emerge from this group. You're talking about Anthony Everett, Benny Bishop Jr., Darius Rush, Graylin Arnold, Kalen Barnes, uh, Corey Trice Jr. I mean, you hear these names, and I'm not sure. And you made some free agent transactions in terms of the year as well. I'm not sure about any of those guys. I do know JP, Lil Peasy. I know he's the guy. I know Little Peasy's going to be a great player moving forward, but I'm not so sure about some of these other guys. I mean, we've got to see them play. We've got to see how this all plays out. And again, iron sharpens iron. It's going to be very important to get these guys prepared and ready. And when you're jumping into a season, I think, in which the defense is going to be your backbone, that has to get answered immediately. But the biggest thing that has to get answered, and the biggest question for the Steelers this year, is the quarterback position. And in my opinion, and this goes with the theme of iron sharpens iron, Justin Fields has to have an incredible camp. Justin Fields has to have the best training camp of his career. And the reason he has to have the best training camp of his career is because iron sharpens iron. He has to light a fire under Russell Wilson and force Russell Wilson to recapture the magic that he had in Seattle. The Steelers need a Russell Wilson playing at his optimum level. They need a tier 2 Russell Wilson. And they need Justin Fields to push him incredibly hard. So you get the number two Russell Wilson. The Steelers can't have Denver Russell Wilson. Although, in terms of advanced metrics and analytics, DYAR, DVOA, Russell Wilson was solid last year. They need Seattle Russell Wilson. They need him to be able to make plays with his legs outside the pocket. They need him to reestablish that touch on a deep ball. They need Russell Wilson to reinvent himself and attack all areas of the football field. They need Russell Wilson at his apex for them to compete this year. And so that's why you need a Justin Fields to have his best camp ever. He has to be that iron that sharpens Russ's iron, because Russ is going to be the starter. I think there's no question there. Also, if Justin Fields has an incredible camp, he puts good tape on there. They see how he prepares. They see he's a great pro. Maybe he's the answer for the future. But he needs to push Russell Wilson to the point where the old Russ emerges. Now, speaking of the old Russ, and speaking of what I think the Steelers need in terms of the new Rush, what they need in terms of Russ this year, what they need, what type of Russell Wilson are they going to get? What type of Russell Wilson do they need? What type of Russell Wilson is going to be the type of guy that pushes them? Now, I mean, when you look at it, and you look at the top 10 quarterbacks, or you look at DVOA, that's value, defensive value adjusted above average. And you look at DYAR, defensive adjusted yards above replacement. These are stats done by the old site Football Outsiders. Number one in terms of the National Football League last year was Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy was at 42.3, 42.5. That means his value, he had a 43% value above a replacement. Tua was second at 31%. Goff was third. Stroud was fourth. Jared Allen was fifth. Jordan Love was sixth. Lamar Jackson was seventh. Prescott was eighth. Stafford was ninth. Kirk Cousins was 10th. Jake Browning was 11th. Wow. But he probably didn't have a ton of attempts. That's probably why. Patrick Mahomes was 12. Geno Smith was 13. I think what we need out of Russell Wilson, and ironically, Russell Wilson had a negative DVOA, meaning his value was below replacement, and the replacement quarterback in terms of value was Murray from Arizona. They need, in terms of value and yards, in terms of DYAR, Russ was 286 above replacement, 286 yards, 22. I think they need Russ firmly in the top 12. Firmly in the top 12 in terms of value and in terms of yards. Top 12 puts him with Mahomes, Stafford, Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Jordan Love, Allen. He needs to be there. In terms of DYAR, you need, I think, a top 12 Russell Wilson. If you go top 12 in terms of DYAR, that's Baker Mayfield, 736 yards above replacement. Then you had Trevor Lawrence, 793, Pat Mahomes, 898, Lamar Jackson, 951, Stafford, 951, Stroud, 1103. They need Russell Wilson to firmly be a top 10 guy, top 10, top 12 guy, I think. Because I think if you have Russell has a stat line of, over 4,000 yards passing, high 20s in terms of touchdown passes, maybe 2-to-1 ratio, touchdown to interceptions. I think that's the type of quarterback play they need. Russ needs to drive the bus in this offense, particularly because you don't really have a number two option at the wide receiver position that's standing out. So They need that Russ. They need Seattle Russ. They don't need Denver Russ. It's got to be Seattle Russ. But I think when I'm asking all these questions, and again, they're checking out the program, the new standard, Iron Sharpens Iron. Please like and subscribe to the program again this year. More of me, less of Neil, but Neil's going to be a special guest. We're going to make it special when we have Neil on the show. And we're going to do a pre-recorded program for Wednesday's live program for the post game. And so the question that I think everybody's asking is this the year that Tomlin finally finishes below 500? I'll say this. If there's any year in which you think Tomlin will not be 500 and the Steelers will not be 500, I think it's this year. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. I'm not ready to make my predictions. But the thing about it to me is you have significant questions at the cornerback position, in my opinion. You have significant questions at the number 2 wide receiver position. You have a new coordinator. You have an offensive line, I think, that will start 2 rookies and a second-year player. You mix all that together. 2 new quarterbacks, new system, having to get comfortable with each other, playing in the AFC North, having the murderous schedule that they do on the back half. If this is any year that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers do not finish 500 or above, it's this year. Just think about what I said. New coordinator. That in and of itself is difficult. Everybody's got to get on page. Head coach OC got to get on page. If I just said that, that would be a big enough issue. Mixed in with the young offensive line. Mixed in with a lack of weapons on the offensive side. And some issues at the cornerback position. When you add all of those up, there are some questions that need to be answered and answered swiftly and quickly when it comes to the Steelers. And if there's a year they don't go 500, it's this year. That's a lot of questions. But of those questions, I think the thing that has to come, that has to be answered quickly is the defense has to be answered. They've got to figure out what that cornerback room is going to look like. Because I think they're going to have to lean on defense early in the year as offense works itself out. Defense is much more reactionary. They've all been together. They know Terrell Austin. He has a great working relationship with Mike Tomlin. I think they get the defensive stuff fixed first. The offensive stuff, new offense for the quarterbacks. Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin have never worked together. I think them working everything out on the offensive side is what's going to be tough. I think that's going to be very, very tough. And I think that is going to lag behind early in the season. I think it's very important that they win as many games as they can early while that offense is catching up. So if you were to ask me, is this the year that Tomlin goes, they don't finish 500, he has a losing record for the first time? I think this year, if you put odds on it, I think this will be the year if it's going to be a year. But knowing Mike Tomlin, he's an excellent coach. He pushes the right buttons. He figures things out, and they win games. They don't necessarily win playoff games or Super Bowls, but they win games. And so I would always bet on black and bet that the Steelers have a successful season under Tomlin. Again, whatever that's defined to you, me, that means going to the playoffs. Not necessarily winning playoff games, but it's hard. My definition of success fluctuates. It has to be modified from just winning Super Bowls because, everybody doesn't win Super Bowls every year. So it's going to be interesting to see how this moves forward. I think this is going to be a very interesting season, and I hope you guys enjoy the ride and stick with me and stick with the new standard. But with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Go Steelers.